So what we will do is, since the text is somewhat heavy, I mean, compared to normal things, and we have a gap of almost a week, so we'll just read the previous paragraph and then continue from there. So we had read till here, the thought of the Gita is not pure monism from here. I'll just read this and then ask someone to read the next paragraph, and that's how we will go. All right. So the thought of the Gita is not pure monism. मोनिज्म का मतलब होता है द वर्ड कम्स फ्रॉम मोनो विच मीन सिंगल के जैसे उसमें बोलते हैं एकमेवा द्वितीयम ब्रह्म देर इज जस्ट वन देर इज नथिंग एल्स ठीक है हालांकि इट इज नॉट कॉल्ड केवलम दैट वे इट इज कॉल्ड अद्वैता नॉट टू बट मोनिज्म बेसिकली मीन्स दैट कि देर इज जस्ट दैट वन रियलिटी अदर देन दैट देर इज नथिंग else. All right. So the thought of the Gita is not pure monism, although it sees in one unchanging, pure, eternal self the foundation of all cosmic existence. Nor Mayavad, although it speaks of the Maya of the three modes of Prakriti, omnipresent in the created world. Nor is it qualified monism. Mayavad basically, the scourge of India that way, is the philosophy that the world is Maya and God alone or Brahman alone is true. And therefore, as soon as possible, get away from this unreality and go to that reality. That is what it comes to ultimately when we follow Mayavad. All right. So the thought of the Gita is not Mayavad. The word Maya comes in the 7th chapter. Daivi Hesha Gunamayi Mama Maya Duratyaya. I will tell the verse number later on chat. But the thought of the Gita is not just that. Okay, so we'll read on. Nor is it qualified monism, although it places in the one his eternal supreme Prakriti manifested in the form of the Jiva. इसके लिए the verse in the Gita is 7.6 para prakritir jiva bhuta. Okay. And qualified monism ko Sanskrit word is Vishishtadvaita. This is the philosophy propounded by Ramanujacharya, the Acharya who succeeded Shankaracharya after around 200 years. Okay. And lays most stress on dwelling in God, Nivasishyasi, 12th chapter में word आता है, rather than dissolution as the supreme state of spiritual consciousness. Okay. That he clearly says, page number 445 पे है, those who want to note down, कि Gita does not preach laya. वो dissolution की बात नहीं करती है. And it's very important and fundamental point, इसीलिए I am anticipating and saying it. 15.7 of the Gita. Mamayvamsho jiva loke jiva bhutah sanatanah. Essays on the Gita, page 445. He says that the individual, if words have any meaning, then the only thing that this means is that the individual के लिए the Sanskrit word is jiva, is eternal. If you are eternal, there is nothing, no such thing as dissolution or extinction or any such thing. We are all eternal individuals. Okay? Not in our ego, obviously, but in our true identity, which is that of the soul. But we are eternal. As individuals, we are eternal, and no dissolution, no extinction basically can be possible for that which is eternal. Very clearly, he says this in the explanation of the 15.7. All right. So rather than dissolution as the supreme state of spiritual consciousness, nor is it Sankhya, although it explains the created world by the double principle of Purusha and Prakriti. Nor is it Vaishnava theism. Sankhya में basically क्या होता है? Sankhya ultimately says that the Purusha and the Prakriti are like two parallel lines which can never meet. So the Purusha, the moment he disidentifies himself from the movements of Prakriti, knows himself as what he truly is, that is the liberation. And once you are liberated, you have nothing to do with the Prakriti anymore. This is the philosophy, oldest philosophy in India, that way. Kapila is third generation from Brahma itself. And ultimately, this is what has led to a जो भी संन्यासवाद हमको दिखता है इंडिया में, the ultimate origin of all this is the Sankhya philosophy. right? Nor is it Vaishnava theism, although it presents to us Krishna, who is the avatar of Vishnu, according to the Puranas, as the supreme deity, and allows no essential difference nor any actual superiority of the status of the indefinable relationless Brahman over that of this Lord of beings, who is the master of the universe and the friend of all creatures. Okay? So it is not even that proclaiming Vishnu or Krishna that way as a separate God who is supreme and all that. The thought is much more comprehensive and universal. It comes later on, right? So, nor any superiority of the status of the indefinable relationless Brahman. When it wants to clarify, it uses the word Param Brahma. Okay? It does not, it's very, very careful with its terminology, the Gita. Like the earlier spiritual synthesis of the Upanishads, this later synthesis, at once spiritual and intellectual, avoids naturally every such rigid determination as would injure its universal comprehensiveness. So the point that he has been trying to make for the last 2, 3 paragraphs is basically that the teaching of the Gita is universal, and any attempt by any acharya or anybody to fit the teaching to their own sect or system is bound to ultimately fail, because truth is infinite by definition, as we said earlier, and the teaching of the Gita is universal. Okay? Which is why I mean nothing can come in the way, which is why we find that the translation of this book is there in almost 150 languages of the world. That's what I had heard once. I have not checked it, obviously, how to check such a thing, but it is one of the most revered scriptures in the world. Its aim is precisely the opposite to that of the polemist commentators who found this scripture established as one of the 3 highest Vedantic authorities and attempted to turn it into a weapon of offense and defense against other schools and systems. Polemics is basically coming the method of arguing to arrive at truth, right? That is what the word polemics means, right? The Gita is not a weapon for dialectical warfare. It is a gate opening on the whole world of spiritual truth, and it is a gate opening on the whole world of spiritual truth and experience. This is a fantastic line, and the view it gives us embraces all the provinces of that supreme region. कुछ भी छूटता नहीं है गीता से. Even I have said this several times. जो yoga of self perfection है, which Sri Aurobindo has elaborated in the 4th part of synthesis of yoga, it is hinted at in phrases like Madbhavamagataha, 4th chapter, and Mama Sadharmyamagata. You become Madbhava means my bhava. Some people say कि it means कि you have reached the soul and that's why you have, but certainly at least the phrase Mama Sadharmyamagata, you become one law of being as me. Okay, Madbhava means basically the divine nature. So you put on the divine nature. Okay, so it is obviously the Gita says that mukti is the main thing. Anityam asukham lokam imam prapya vajasvamam dukkhalayam ashashvatam. All this, पुनरावर्ती नोर्जुना, पुनरावर्ती से मुक्त होना is what it teaches, but वो seed form में वो self perfection का भी उसके अंदर है, but it's only in a very very seed form, and as likely when you don't elaborate it, the teaching has been misinterpreted to say that it basically means liberation or janma maran se मुक्त होना. This is what Gita teaches, but fundamentally, as he said, what it teaches is dwelling in God. Nivasishyasi mayeva. 12th chapter में आता है, I think verse number 6. It can be double checked. All right. So it maps out, but it does not cut up or build walls or hedges to confine our vision. So it shows us everything. It gives us the मतलब map वगैरह दे देती है and all that, but it does not build walls or hedges to confine our vision. Basically, there is nothing per se in the Gita which limits it. This is the limitation वगैरह जो इसके साथ associate हुआ है, and because of which it could not exercise its influence fully. Again, I refer back to that aphorism of Mother. The influence of the Gita has become decisive after Sri Aurobindo's interpretation. All right. So this is basically the sum and substance of this paragraph. Now, whoever would like to read can please read this. Somebody, well, the aim of making people read this is to have the benefit of the mantric power in the text. So please, matlab, somebody please read this. It's not fair that I just keep reading the text. Whoever would like to read. There have been other syntheses. Please read, somebody. Arora ji, would you read? Or Manoj ji?
Yeah, I'll read.
Please read.
There have been other syntheses in the long history of Indian thought. We start with the Vedic synthesis of psychological being of man in its highest flights and widest ranging of divine knowledge, power, joy, life, and glory, with the cosmic existence of the gods, pursued behind the symbols of the material universe into those superior planes which are hidden from the physical sense and the material mentality. The crown of this synthesis was in the experience of the Vedic rishis, something divine, transcendent, and blissful, in whose unity the increasing soul of man and the eternal divine fullness of the cosmic Godhead meet perfectly and fulfill themselves. The Upanishads take up this crowning experience of the earlier seers and make it their starting point for a high and profound synthesis of spiritual knowledge. They draw together into a great harmony all that had been seen and experienced by the inspired and liberated knowers of the eternal throughout a great and fruitful period of spiritual seeking. The Gita starts from this Vedantic synthesis and, upon the basis of its essential ideas, builds another harmony of the three great means and powers: love, knowledge, and works, through which the soul of man can directly approach and cast itself into the eternal. There is yet another, the tantric, which, though less subtle and spiritually profound, is even more bold and forceful than the synthesis of the Gita, for it seizes upon the obstacles of to the spiritual life and compels them to become the means for a richer spiritual conquest and enables us to embrace the whole of life in our divine scope as the Leela of the divine. And in some directions, it is more immediately rich and fruitful, for it brings forward into the foreground, along with the divine knowledge, divine works, and the enriched devotion of divine love, the secrets also of the Hatha and the Raja Yogas, the use of the body and of mental ascesis for the opening up of the divine life on all its plane, to which the Gita gives only a passing and perfunctory attention. Moreover, it grasped at that idea of the divine perfectibility of man possessed by the Vedic rishis, but thrown into background by the intermediate ages, which is destined to fill so large a place in any future synthesis of human thought, experience, and aspiration.
Right. Thank you, sir. So this is one of the very amazing paragraphs from this book where he clearly, and as students of, as those who wanting to know, because wanting to know the main milestones and how the culture has evolved. So this, at least when I came across this first time, it was such a important historical education as to the evolution of the culture, as to the spiritual evolution of the culture, how he tells at 1, 2, 3, 4, what are the synthesis. His own synthesis, obviously, he does not mention here. So we'll just read this and see whatever else we can grasp other than the text written here. There have been other syntheses. So single mein synthesis hota hai. In plural, we pronounce this as syntheses. There have been other syntheses in the long history of Indian thought. And but for a genius like Sri Aurobindo, we will hardly be able to track that long history. It is he who has done the impossible, literally. The secret of the Veda, nobody else except, I mean, I would say God himself could have written such a book. It is impossible. And it was written because Krishna told him the origins of human speech. Otherwise, ho hi nahi sakta hai. Why was it not done? यास्काचार्य ने की 20,000, खैर उसमें नहीं जाते। 500 BC में किया था। सायंड ने जो किया है 13th century में, इट इज अ टोटली naturalistic interpretation. The real secret was lost, and because of which, 19th century European scholarship made us feel ashamed of our own culture by telling that the Vedic thing is just naturalism and animistic worship nonsense, basically, right? So there have been other syntheses in the long history of Indian thought. We start with the Vedic synthesis of the psychological being of man in its highest flights and widest rangings of divine knowledge, power, life, glory, blah blah. लंबा सेंटेंस है. First of all, what does he mean? What are the books? Okay, just take information के लिए. So mainly जो उसको बोलते हैं, there is the Rig Veda Samhita, okay, composed of 10 books, मंडला बोलते हैं, around 10,000, क्या कहते हैं, around 10,000 verses in total. सूक्तास कितने हैं exactly I would not be able to say. दैट इज ऋग्वेद संहिता. अगेन द वर्ड संहिता जो वो सिंथेसिस बोल रहे हैं, संहिता के लिए द कॉरेस्पॉन्डिंग इंग्लिश वर्ड इज एंथोलॉजी. इट इज अ कलेक्शन ऑफ पोएम्स. सम का मतलब होता है टोटल करना, संस्कृत का जो सम है. सो बेसिकली द वर्ड इटसेल्फ क्लैरिफाइज व्हाट इट इज. इट इज अ संहिता, इट इज अ कलेक्शन. सो यू कैन इमेजिन दैट earlier, since time immemorial, basically all this knowledge was there, and the knowledge is there, but in the पैसेज ऑफ टाइम, 4th चैप्टर में गीता के बिगनिंग में आता है ना, सकाले नेह महता योगो नष्टः परंतप. इन द पैसेज ऑफ ग्रेट टाइम दिस नॉलेज वाज लॉस्ट, राइट? सो बट इट वाज एग्जिस्टिंग, एंड देन Vyasa basically, he has compiled all these rigs into one place. That is what the tradition says. So that is the Rig Veda Samhita. Then the Yajurveda Samhita, which is basically for ritual purpose. That's what I have heard. Most of the mantras in that. Samaveda is the verses of the Rig Veda itself. उसको Rik बोलते हैं. The word itself, the word Rik means word of illumination. All the three words, what they mean is there in one of the chapters of the essays on the Gita. What does Rik mean? What does Yajus mean? What does Sama mean? Like that. मुझे Rik का याद रहता है. It's a word of illumination. Okay. Sama is nothing but the Riks put to music. That is why Krishna says Vedanam Sama Vedosmi. Because when you add the power of music to the Riks, it becomes even more powerful. जो rhythm आ जाती है because of the music, that rhythm helps you to get that spiritual effect much faster, right? Therefore, that is why the greater utility of bhajan and kirtan as opposed to merely the japa, right? So Rig, Sama, Yajur, and Atharva Veda, which also has I mean physical चीजों के लिए, physical effects के लिए, what some even might call black magic, मतलब that kind of occultism is also there in the Atharva Veda. These are the main books, ठीक है? अब इसमें नहीं दिया है, but since God knows when we will reach that state. This is the Veda, this is the Veda as a whole. Shri Aurobindo इसको Veda बोलते हैं, संहिताज हैं ये, ठीक है? Other than these, इसके अलावा, and between the Upanishads there are two more texts. They are called the Brahmanas and the Aranyakas. They are considered part of the Vedic literature, ठीक है? So Aranyaka comes from the word Aranya, forest. Basically texts which were composed in the meditative silence of the forest. So the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, it is at once an Aranyaka as well as an Upanishad. All right. Few other names which I know are Taittiriya Aranyaka, for example, right? Among the uska, that is actually later. After the proper Samhita, proper जिसको है ऋग्वेद संहिता now, the second is scriptures, उनका जो नाम है, it is called Brahmanas. And the Brahmanas, though Sri Aurobindo says in The Secret of the Veda, they have their philosophical portions, but they are basically to do with how to do the ritual, ठीक है? सेटअप कैसे करना है. Even मतलब गोपत ब्राह्मणा and शतपथ ब्राह्मणा, these are the two which are most widely quoted. Historians like Michel Denino and all these Indologists, they refer to these in their books and lectures. So bricks का arrangement कैसे करना है, वेदी कैसे होना चाहिए, all these details are there in the Brahmanas. Rituals कैसे करना है, अध्वर्यु कहाँ बैठेगा, पुरोहित कहाँ बैठेगा, all these things. They are basically to do with the how to do the rituals एकदम properly कैसे करना है. That is the text for that, ठीक है? In the Yajurveda, I should clarify, it is more like just for example, the Ishopanishad. The Ishopanishad is the last and 40th chapter of the Shukla Yajurveda. All right. So, but in terms of, again, उसका वो meaning exactly देखना पड़ेगा, but this is basically what is. Okay. Then comes the Aranyaka, and then उसके बाद the next synthesis which Sri Aurobindo is talking about here. That is called the Upanishad. अब इसमें कितना time लगेगा, कितना time लगा rather, that is, anybody's guess. Tilak has done his own scholarship regarding this. Okay, there was a gap of almost 1,000 years between the Vedic Samhita and the Brahmanas. Nobody can really tell, right? So this is just for completing the information that is given in this part of the book. So we start with the Vedic synthesis of the psychological being of man in its highest flights. Psychological being of man in its highest flights. Again, his use of the word psychology here, okay, and his quotation from the synthesis of yoga. Yoga is nothing but practical psychology. Simply by writing this one statement, Sri Aurobindo has bridged the European science called psychology and our own indigenous science of self-development and self-elevation called yoga. All right. So psychological of being of man in its highest flights. Okay. We can immediately connect as mental beings. We can again, वो जो मायावाद की वजह से गैप वाली प्रॉब्लम है ना, कि यहाँ डिवाइन और एक बार छलांग लगा के, मतलब यहाँ पे ह्यूमन और एक बार छलांग लगा के वहां पहुंचे, एंड देयर इज नो गैप बिटवीन द टू, देयर इज अ प्रॉपर लैडर बिटवीन द टू. उसके ऊपर पूरा एक कैंटो है इन सावित्री. इट इज कॉल्ड द वर्ल्ड स्टेयर, वेयर श्री अरबिंदो हैज बेसिकली कनेक्टेड द जो ह्यूमन कॉन्शियसनेस है, बॉडी माइंड लाइफ का, विद द हायर लेवल्स ऑफ कॉन्शियसनेस थ्रू दैट वर्ल्ड स्टेयर. पूरा उन्होंने डिस्क्राइब किया हुआ. It's a proper ladder. He has built वो जो gaps missing थे in the texts, he has covered those gaps, right? Psychological being of man in its highest flights. उसको उसमें क्या बोलते हैं? परमे व्योमन. वेद में the word is परमे व्योमन, the highest ether. That is what that plane is called in the Veda. In its highest flights and widest rangings of divine knowledge, power, joy, life, and glory, with the cosmic existence of the gods. This is the difference. In the Gita, the emphasis is on the Supreme Himself, God Himself, Deva Deva, Purushottama, Parameshwara, Param Brahma, Paramatma, Shri Bhagavan, Ishvara, etc., etc. These are all the words used for that, right? In the Veda, in the Rigvedic time, basically, it's mostly the gods. And last time एक verse वो जो अग्नि वाला, अग्नि number one जो verses हैं सबसे ज़्यादा, they are for Indra. Next comes Agni, like that. And then Varuna, Mitra, Bhaga, Aryama, Vishnu के ऊपर भी हैं, रुद्र के ऊपर भी हैं. But these main deities, they wait till the Puranic time to come into prominence, when the pantheon is basically reorganized. All right. So cosmic existence of the gods. But the idea of the oneness is there in the Veda, that Ekam Sad Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. Okay. So the full verse, if I Indram Mitram Varunam Agnimahu Atho Divyah Sasuparno Garutman Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti Agnim Yamam Matarishvanamahu. Okay. It is known by these different names. Ahu. Ahu means it is said. ये उसके अलग अलग नाम हैं. But Ekam Sad Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. The truth is one. The sages call it by different names. For the sake of the power of the words, I will try to recite it again. Indram Mitram Varunam Agnimahu Atho Divyah Sasuparno Garutman Ekam Sat Vipra Bahudha Vadanti Agnim Yamam Matarishvanamahu. उसमें वो जो सेकंड वाले पार्ट में है Suparno Garutman, that is basically Garuda. If somebody reads the Mahabharata, one can read the glory with which Garuda's birth is described. He's so luminous and all that. There was a sadhak called Romain Palit in the 1930s in the ashram. Uske piche Garuda was seen like that, protecting him. So mother clarified that that was Garuda. So all these beings, they have been in the ashram. They used to come when the mother used to conduct the meditations. Okay, so that apart. Pursued behind the symbols of the material universe. उसमें 3 लेवल पे ऑपरेट होता है in the Vedic verses. The Adi Bhautika, purely the physical meaning of the verse. The Adi Daivika, the God meaning of the verse, कि इसका ये God है. This is the aspect of the divine. And the Adhyatmika, which is the pure self, which is the thing which unifies everything. Right? So one has to remember this, that the Vedic verses are having a triple meaning. Not all the verses probably. You cannot say that सारे verses के अंदर ये triple layer of meaning है. सम के कुछ के अंदर 2 लेवल हो गए, 2 लेवल तो ऑलमोस्ट सबके अंदर है, wherever they wanted to. And why they did this, just to be very clear, this is a cryptography done by the Vedic rishis, because the human mind was not paripakva enough, it was not mature enough. अगर वो they were not ready that the secret could be revealed to them. That is why for one who was only physical minded, उसको केवल physical purpose serve होता था. But somebody who was initiated, who knew that this is what it really means, for him the spiritual purpose was served by the rigs. This is like, all who are familiar with Sri Aurobindo know this, but just to reiterate the point. Pursuit behind the symbols of the material universe into those superior planes which are hidden from the physical sense and the material mentality. इसमें I must say कि highest flights and widest rangings of divine knowledge, power, joy, life, and glory. So it was not just knowledge to free yourself. It was, they were wanting everything. They were wanting power. They were wanting joy, life. It was a very complete and integral spirituality as compared to the later period where the sannyasvad starts to dominate. Okay. And where basically, in order, if you want to attain the divine, you have to don the orange robe and leave the world and, pursue in that way. So that is a phase in the long history of Indian thought. It is not the origin of Indian thought. This needs to be understood very clearly. The original jo tha Vedic wala, it was, Sri Aurobindo calls it the spiritual pragmatism. It was much more integral. The rishis used to have, they were samriddh. In fact, the English word rich, R-I-C-H, it comes from the Sanskrit word rishi via the French word riche, R-I-C-H-E. Right? The dhatu is ri, which means to attain. जो प्राप्त कर गया है basically. Of course, the initial meaning, but it meant simultaneously both spiritual riches as well as material riches. Sri Aurobindo clarifies in the foundations of Indian culture कि जो spiritual heights हैं, they are not built upon a vacuum. So I'll post that sentence from the foundations of Indian culture. कि the race, it was most spiritual when it lived most richly, and when the life element was also at its strongest. Otherwise, devoid of the material base and that life base, the spirit itself starts enervating after a point. All right. So, yeah. Next, the crown of this synthesis was in the experience of the Vedic rishis, something divine, transcendent, and blissful, in whose unity the increasing soul of man and the eternal divine fullness of the cosmic gods, dono ka, meet perfectly and fulfill themselves. Even the gods are unfulfilled until they reach that unity, right? And some very amazing things are there. I mean, this is not a class of the Veda or secret of the Veda, but for example, the colloquy of Indra and Agastya, right? So Agastya is the Rishi, Indra is the god. So 5 verses हैं उसमें केवल. I remember the first one. ननु नमस्ति नो श्वः कस्तत् वेद यदद्भुतम् अन्यस्य चित्तम अभिसंचरेण्यम उताधीतम विनश्यति. जो last part है, that's utadhit. The moment you try to catch it by thought, it vanishes. जैसे ही आप उसको धी से पकड़ने की कोशिश करोगे, वो गायब हो जाएगा, बिकॉज वो उसके ग्रास में आ ही नहीं सकता. बट बेसिकली व्हाट द गॉड सेज टू द ऋषि इन द वर्सेस कि व्हाट अबाउट माय फुलफिलमेंट, ही सेज, नाउ दैट थ्रू माय हेल्प you have reached this state of liberation, don't abandon me, oh brother. Indra requests Agastya, and Agastya agrees. Basically what it means is the fulfillment of the mind itself. कि the mind itself should become full of the light of the divine. वरना इंद्र का fulfillment कैसे होगा? This is an example of the fulfillment of the world by not letting it go. आपको through the help of the illumined mind, through the help of the divine mind, you become luminous, and आपको idea आ जाता है कि how to liberate yourself, and that's what you do. आप liberate करते हो and खत्म कहानी. What about the fulfillment of the cosmic mind? And then Agastya obviously agrees to Indra, and it's a happy ending to that set of verses. ठीक है? So इसमें not only the soul, increasing soul of man, increasing के लिए in the very first सूक्ता, the word is वर्धमानम स्वेदमे. वर्धमान means to increase. महावीर जो जैनिज्म में होता है, उसका नाम जो है वर्धमान महावीर. That is the significance of that word. This increasing thing, this increase from life to life. हर लाइफ में जो वो सोल के अंदर नेट इंक्रीज होता है. एंड दिस ऑल्सो अपने आप को एकदम रीअश्योर करने के लिए, साइकिक बीइंग जो है, सोल जो साइकिक एंटिटी है, उसके अंदर नेट नेगेटिव कभी नहीं. देयर इज ऑलवेज अ प्लस इन द सोल is evolution as far as that is concerned. What can happen is that if you indulge in lower tendencies too much, then a part of the vital can get stuck to some animal or something. But once you have reached the human level, you can never go down below it. एक वो fear आता है, कई कुछ जगहों पे आ जाता है कि कहीं मैं जो एनिमल तो नहीं बन जाऊंगा, विल में डिवॉल्व तो हाँ, if you don't live your life in a proper way, then in the next life the circumstances in which you will have to evolve, they will be even more difficult. And the worst of that is obviously suicide. इसीलिए ईशोपनिषद में उसको मना करते हैं, clearly मना करते हैं. And it says that you must live 100 years and all that, right? So meet perfectly and fulfill themselves. Next comes the Upanishads. Now it's anybody's guess कि कब वेदा का compile हुआ था. Nobody can really say. Tilak said 4500 BC. That is when the Rig Veda Samhita was composed and all that. ठीक है. Upanishads का, like if you go to Google, you will find कि वो 700 BC में छांदोग्य उपनिषद बोलते हैं. But I can't really say. Nobody can really say. Okay? तो time point out करना easy नहीं है और शायद जरूरत भी नहीं है. What is really important, we can't go back in time ना. What is important is the knowledge, which is the our demand and need from the Gita. इसमें वो क्या living spiritual influence है जो हम ले सकते हैं इससे और जो हमें लेना चाहिए और जो necessary है for our spiritual evolution. All right. So the crown of this synthesis was in the Upanishads take up this crowning experience of the earlier seers, which is why you find in the Upanishads constantly referring back to the Veda कि देखो वेद में ये कहा था, वो वेद के वर्सेस कोट कर रहे हैं उसके अंदर. In the major Upanishads this is there. Major से मेरा मतलब है the big ones. छांदोग्य, बृहदारण्यक, ईशाकेन, कठ एक्सेट्रा टू स्मॉल. उनके अंदर कहीं रेफर करेंगे. एक में 18 हैं, एक में 12 हैं. मांडुक्य में, केना में मुश्किल से 24-25 होंगे. मतलब ये भी 30 से बहुत ज्यादा नहीं है उसके अंदर. तो राइट. So the Upanishads take up this crowning experience of the earlier seers and make it their starting point. So Vedanta is also synonymous with Upanishads. कि the Upanishad जो वो Vedic period का end है. It is the anta. It's the summit of the Vedic period. Like that. All right. So the Upanishads take up this crowning experience of the earlier. ये crowning experience क्या था? Of the unity. जो पिछले सेंटेंस में बोला, something divine, transcendent and blissful. इसके लिए in the 10th mandala पुरुष सूक्त जो आता है, सहस्त्र शीर्षा पुरुषः सहस्राक्ष सहस्त्रपात, he has many heads, he has many eyes, he has all this. गीता के अंदर, वो गीता तक के अंदर 13 चैप्टर के you find a similar verse. सर्वतः पाणिपादं तत् सर्वतः शिशिरोमुखं सर्वतः श्रुतिमल्लोके सर्वमावृत्य तिष्ठति सर्वेंद्रिय गुणाभासम. बहुत ब्यूटीफुल वर्सेस है. I mean the ring of those Sanskrit verses. It's unbelievable, very divine actually. So the Upanishads take up this crowning experience of the earlier seers and make it their starting point for a high and profound synthesis of spiritual knowledge. I mean, essentially, if you have to say, जो सनातन धर्म, जो हिंदू सोसाइटी आज के टाइम में ऑर्गेनाइज्ड है, इट इज ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ द उपनिषद्स. वैदिक नॉलेज इज ऑब्वियसली द फाउंटेन हेड और वो सारा आ से आ रहा है, नो डाउट. बट उसका वो जो पहली बार नॉलेज का एकदम, बिकॉज द वैदिक थिंग इज इट्स वेरी सिंबॉलिक. तो वो symbolic mentality also we have inherited from our Vedic forefathers, no doubt. But as such, the knowledge base of the Hindu society is the Upanishads. Why I am saying this is because if you just confine yourself to reading the Gita, आपने उपनिषद पढ़े ही नहीं, बहुत सारी चीजें आपको पता ही नहीं चलेंगी कि हमारे कल्चर में इस चीज का सोर्स क्या है. Right? You will not find. You will get that knowledge only when you read the Upanishads. एग्जाम्पल जब इसका मेरे माइंड में आएगा कि व्हाट इज देयर इन द उपनिषद विच इज नेसेसरी, विच इज नॉट देयर इन द गीता. इनफैक्ट द गीता इटसेल्फ रिफर्स यू टू रीड द ब्रह्म सूत्रास एंड टू रीड द उपनिषद्स इन द 13th चैप्टर. वो आपको वहां पे एक वर्स में रिफर करती है कि फॉर द कंप्लीट नॉलेज गो टू द ब्रह्म सूत्रास. ब्रह्म सूत्र इज लाइक मतलब सिबलिंग है इन दैट सेंस ऑफ द उपनिषद्स, वन ऑफ द 3 वेदांतिक राइटिंग्स. ऑलराइट, आई एम लुकिंग, अभी एग्जांपल आ जाएगा उपनिषद्स का क्या नेसेसरी वाला है. ओके, सो they draw together into a great harmony all that had been seen and experienced by the inspired and liberated knowers of the eternal throughout a great and fruitful period of spiritual seeking. There are 12 major Upanishads, as Sri Aurobindo has said. Isha, Kena, Katha, Mundaka, Mandukya, Prashna, Aitareya, Taittiriya, Chandogya, Brihadaranyaka, Shvetashvatara, and the Kaivalya. These are the names of the 12 major Upanishads. There are several others. ठीक है, 100 के साथ 100 के ऊपर गिनती चली जाती है, but they are not. शिवबंधु कहते हैं सम ऑफ देम आर सूडो, जो उपनिषद का स्टाइल है लिटरेचर का, वो पावर नहीं है उनके अंदर। दीज आर द 12 मेन वंस। ठीक है, किसी में 18 वर्सेस हैं। ईशा इज द मेन वन अकॉर्डिंग टू शिवबंधु, विच इज वाई जस्ट ऑन दोज 18 वर्सेस ही हैज रिटन ऑलमोस्ट 600 पेजेस। ठीक है, सो जस्ट आई गेव द नेम यहाँ पे, उनके डिटेल में जाना तो मतलब देर आर लाइक 2 वॉल्यूम्स ऑफ शिवबंधु ऑन देम, एंड द वर्ल्ड इज फैसिनेटेड। जिसका भी नॉलेज में इंटरेस्ट हो जाता है उसको उपनिषद हाथ लग जाए वो गया काम से। मतलब दे जस्ट सो अब्जॉर्बिंग, एंड उनकी ब्यूटी और उसको डिस्क्राइब करना मेरे बस की बात नहीं है। शिवबंधु हैज डिस्क्राइब्ड इट, इट इज देयर इन वॉल्यूम 18 में है एक जगह पे ऑन वन पेज। आई प्रॉब्ली शेयर इट एट द एंड ऑफ द क्लास। इट्स अ ब्यूटिफुल डिस्क्रिप्शन ऑफ द नेचर ऑफ द उपनिषद्स। ऑल राइट, so the Upanishads take up they draw together into a great harmony all that had been seen and experienced by the inspired and liberated knowers of the eternal through a great and fruitful period of spiritual seeking. उस टाइम में क्या होता था, people were not saying कि they were basically going to each other, to the rishis were visiting each other and traveling across the length and breadth of the country. It was a great period. ठीक है, उपनिषद गंगा जो सीरियल बना था, some of that glimpse you get there. So they were going to the other rishis and saying, this is what I have realized. ठीक है, ये मैंने सीखा है। या इवन अ सीकर हु डिडंट नो एनीथिंग, ही वुड गो टू समबडी। उपनिषद का लिटरली का वर्ड मीनिंग यही होता है, सिटिंग नियर। That's what the word means, sitting near the teacher. That is one of the meanings of the word, right? So this is what I have realized. What have you realized? They were exchanging notes, and this is how they built up this profound synthesis of the Upanishads, right? So the book is on Gita, but I mean, sorry, the Gita starts from this Vedantic synthesis, that is the Upanishads, and upon the basis of its essential ideas. The main idea of the Upanishad, as I said earlier, is Brahman. This is the main word of the Upanishads. Brahman. Isha bhi hai, Isha Upanishad mein, connecting to cloud server. Okay. But the main dominant word of the Upanishads is Brahman, Brahmavad. This is the main doctrine of the Upanishads, so to say, right? So the Gita starts from this Vedantic synthesis upon the basis of its essential ideas. Ekam eva advitiyam Brahma. This is a great phase of the Upanishads, one of the great phases of the Upanishads. There are several others. ये महावाक्य की कैटेगरी में नहीं आता है. For each of the, again, if you want to build the connection with the Vedas and the Upanishads, then from each of the 4 major Vedas, there is a branch of Upanishad connected to it. So the 4 Mahavakyas, they are connected to one of the Vedas, like that. This is all मतलब can be scholastic or academic. उसमें वो spiritual juice उतना नहीं होता है, तो I'm not going. Otherwise, I remember कि किसमें कौन सा था. ठीक है. So the Gita starts from this Vedantic synthesis, and upon the, I've been speaking for too long, and upon the basis of its essential ideas, builds another harmony of the 3 great means and powers: love, knowledge, and works, through which the soul of man can directly approach and cast itself into the eternal. Very roughly, you can say कि जो Upanishads हैं, they are basically with the knowledge aspect. ठीक है. Bhakti is added by the Gita, so love. ठीक है. And works mane, through their karma and all that, and offering that to the deities, the progress happens. So in that rough sense, you could say that works is that way in the Vedas. The knowledge is the dominant jnana in the Upanishads, and finally jo culmination hai inka bhakti, because it is Krishna avatar. Sri Aurobindo clarifies in the aphorism कि it is the exile in Vrindavan which created devotional religion. Before that, there was only the traditional kind of worship. So it is the exile in Vrindavan which created the devotional religion. उसके पहले वो था ही नहीं. Okay? And the concept of the Purushottama, the idea of the Purushottama, it is the Gita which establishes it for the first time in the history of Indian spirituality. And without that idea, bhakti is impossible. In other words, what it means is कि हमारी जो भी भक्ति हमारे अंदर है, okay, it will not find its fulfillment until we have realized, we have started dwelling in the, हमें समझ में नहीं आ गया जब तक कि वो पुरुषोत्तमा क्या है. It can be very मतलब disturbing कि यार भगवान भगवान बोलते रहते हैं, पुरुषोत्तम पुरुषोत्तम बोलते हैं, but we don't understand what it means. For that, obviously, I mean, Essays on the Gita, उसका purpose ये है, to make us dwell in the consciousness of that Purushottam. And once you dwell in it, once you reach that, then you are Kritakritya. 15th chapter के end में these verses are there. एक बार आप वहां पहुंच गए, once you have reached that Purushottama, then there is nothing left for you to do. Sarvarambha Parityagi, then you become an instrument of the divine, and basically all that happens through you is the will of the divine, right? So through which the soul of man can directly, there is yet another, time है ना अभी, हाँ सॉरी 18-20 मिनट है, there is yet another tantric, there is a footnote here, all the Puranic tradition, it must be remembered, draws the richness of its contents from the Tantra. Yeah. Tantra, the word itself means method. Synthesis of yoga mein, the English word which he has given for the Sanskrit word Tantra is method. Or you can say, if you want to more grossify the meaning, technique. ठीक है? Method is the word. Tantra का मतलब होता है method. तो all the worship that we see in our temples, जो सारे पुरानी की हैं basically, इट्स ऑल वो मेथड एक है ना उसके अंदर, हाउ टू वेव द लाइट एंड कहाँ कौन सा क्या लगाना है, ऑल दैट इज बेसिकली तंत्र। इसमें एक चीज और मैं बोलता हूँ कि इन द एट प्लेसेस इन द फाउंडेशंस ऑफ इंडियन कल्चर, दिस इज द ओल्ड टाइटल ऑफ द बुक given in 1972. I like that title, that's why I keep using it. Current title of that book is The Renaissance in India and Other Essays on Indian Culture. ठीक है? तो देयर ही सेज तांत्रो पुराणिक हाइफनेट करके या पुरानो तांत्रिक, तो इट्स बेसिकली जो जिस वक्त पुराण आए हैं, in a sense you can say roughly that is the time when the tantras came and they are a similar period के वो है, all right, पुरानो तांत्रिक। बट हियर वो यहाँ पे एंड जैसा I said कि जो वैदिक पैंथियन था, all this was sort of replaced by the Puranic pantheon. So in the Vedic pantheon, for example, the word Brahma you won't find as such. अगर वो होगा वहां पे तो उसका वैसे मीनिंग नहीं होगा। The deity there is called Brahmanaspati, and that actually splits into two even verbally, Brahma and Brihaspati in the Puranic pantheon. And these are extremely interesting things, as a side note to the main text of the Gita, right? So coming back to the text, कहाँ गया? हाँ, there is yet another, the tantric, which though less subtle and spiritually profound. अच्छा हाँ, अब पिछले तीनों में और इसमें फंडामेंटल डिफरेंस क्या है? The Veda, the Upanishad and the Vedanta is based on the masculine side of existence, the Purusha. ठीक है? Tantra is fundamentally based on what can be called, हालांकि in the truth there is nothing masculine nor feminine nor neuter. These are all methods of language to try to catch the eternal and to put it into words. वो वैसे हो ही नहीं पाता। ठीक है? When you want to be absolutely subtle, तो आप उसको तत् बोल देते हो, न्यूट्रल जेंडर यूज कर दिया। जब आप उसको मोर एक रीचेबल बनाना चाहते हो इन द मैस्कुलिन सेंस, तब आप उसको सह बोल देते हो, स पर्यगात शुक्रमकायम अव्रणम, स वर्ड यूज करके, स माने ही। जब आप उसको फेमिनाइन तो आपने सा वर्ड यूज कर दिया, बट फंडामेंटली इट इज बियॉन्ड ऑल वोकैबुलरी, राइट? तो तंत्र के अंदर द थिंग विच इज कॉट होल्ड ऑफ for liberation and enjoyment and everything, that is the feminine side of existence, that divine energy, bhavani. Bhavani literally, bhavani का मतलब होता है she the becoming, भू का मतलब to be, भव का मतलब to become, भवानी मतलब literally means she the becoming. This is what really bhavani is. अगर तुम्हें भवानी को रियलाइज करना है, you have to realize her, you have to realize her as all that is, जो जो वो बन गई है, this is the becoming. Okay, this is also an opportunity to say कि instead of using the set of words creator and creation, which falsifies the whole thing, we should start using the words being and becoming. ये मैंने पहले भी बोला था अवतार रोड वाले क्लासेस में, right? So there is yet another, the tantric, which though less subtle and spiritually profound, because उस पे आऊंगा चलो मैं, is even more bold and forceful than the synthesis of the Gita, even more bold and forceful. ठीक है?
ये जस्ट अ मिनट, ये देवी की स्तुति में आता है भव्य अभव्य सदागति, मतलब जो
अच्छा
108 नाम है दुर्गा के, उसमें
अच्छा,
भव्य
ओके
अभव्य उल्टा भी वही है, जिनके जो लय हो जाती हैं, जो या जिनमें सब लय हो जाता है,
ओके ओके,
भव्य
वंडरफुल,
अभव्य सदागति।
ओके वंडरफुल, ये मुझे पता नहीं था, थैंक यू अर्पण, थैंक यू। ठीक है, सो फॉर इट सीजेज अपॉन इवन द ऑब्स्टेकल्स टू द स्पिरिचुअल लाइफ, यहाँ पे वो जो रिफर कर रहे हैं, इट इज द वो जो पंचमकार होता है, थिंग्स लाइक मैथुन, मत्स्य, वो सब जो है, उनको भी यूज किया जाता है एज अ मीन्स ऑफ स्पिरिचुअल लिबरेशन एंड अल्टीमेटली द कॉन्क्वेस्ट ऑफ मैटर बाय स्पिरिट। बट इसमें जो वो याद रखने का जो कैवियट है वो ये है, it is strictली done in the guidance of a guru, and in some processes the guru आपके बगल में बैठा होना चाहिए, otherwise you cannot do those things. ठीक है, वाम मार्ग बोलते हैं जो नॉर्मल मार्ग है, जिसमें जब जिसमें मंत्र यूज होते हैं, यंत्र होते हैं, जो डायग्राम्स वगैरह हैं, और जो है उसको कहते हैं दक्षिणा मार्ग। ठीक है, दिस नीड्स टू बी केप्ट इन माइंड। बट श्री अरबिंदो बीइंग फ्रॉम बंगाल एंड दैट बीइंग द स्ट्रॉन्ग होल्ड ऑफ तंत्रा इन इंडिया, सो ऑब्वियसली वहां पे उन्होंने देखा है एंड ऑल दिस, एंड उसका एक स्लाइड वो हमको ग्लिम्स यहाँ पे दे रहे हैं where did it go? It sees in even upon the obstacles to the spiritual life and compels them to become the means for a richer spiritual conquest. ठीक है? Why I made that point of उसका जो वो कैविएट था, बिकॉज इन द वेस्ट समटाइम्स यू फाइंड, आप गूगल पे देखेंगे उसमें वो अपना कुछ तो वो तंत्रा वंत्रा शुरू कर दिया, उसमें वो सेक्स भी कर रहे हैं, सब कुछ कर रहे हैं, एंड दे थिंक दैट दिस इज द मीन्स ऑफ देयर लिबरेशन. एब्सोल्यूट नॉनसेंस. कुछ उससे होने वाला नहीं है. एंड यू नो वी आर ऑल्सो इनामर्ड ऑफ द वेस्ट. वो जो भी कचरा करेंगे प्रैक्टिस, वी विल स्टार्ट फॉलोइंग इट. हालांकि ये चेंज हो रहा है. दिस इज व्हाई आई गिव दैट कैविएट. ठीक है, उसको नहीं करना. श्री अरबिंदो डज
just
नॉट
to
कहीं.
just to
हाँ,
add one thing,
yes
ये
please.
ये जो सेक्स वाला पॉइंट है, तो ये मारण, मैथुन, मत्स्य, मदिरा, ये पंच मकार हैं तंत्र में.
Yes, yes,
ये
yes.
दीज आर एक्चुअली एन एक्सेप्टेड पाथ, लेकिन इनका एक अधिकार भेद होता है. पहले वो अधिकार को प्राप्त किए बिना, उसमें एक भैरव भैरवी की साधना जो होती है पूरी तंत्र में, इसी का राउंड है. उसके बिना वेस्ट में इट्स अ चीप इमिटेशन ऑफ दैट,
Exactly.
बट इट इज अ वैलिड पाथ.
इट इज अ वैलिड पाथ, नो डाउट. इंडिया में वो
Yes.
काफी लंबे टाइम तक प्रैक्टिस हुआ है. श्री अरबिंदो सिंथेसिस ऑफ योगा में ये पॉइंट भी क्लियरली कहते हैं कि बिकॉज दिस इज बेस्ड ऑन प्रकृति. तंत्रा इज बेस्ड ऑन प्रकृति, एंड प्रकृति इन इट्स नेचर इज समथिंग, मतलब ऐसे नहीं कहना चाहिए फिजेटी या वो मूविंग या वो डायनामिक उस तरह से. इसीलिए उसका एक वो स्ट्रॉन्ग बेस नहीं रह पाया, एंड ग्रेजुअली इट फेल इनटू डिसरिप्यूट.
Basic the point
योगा
is,
में श्री अरबिंदो मेक्स दिस पॉइंट वेरी क्लियरली.
yeah, if in these five, these are the five most turbid vital movements in human consciousness.
Right.
If you can remain meditative in these five movements, then nothing in life can break your meditation. That is the essential point behind this.
एग्जैक्टली. एंड श्री अरबिंदो ने जो तंत्र दिया है, बिकॉज वी आर रीडिंग हिज बुक, है ना, उन्होंने क्या तंत्र दिया? मदर. जो मदर को उन्होंने इस्टेब्लिश किया है. ठीक है. एंड जो वो 4 एस्पेक्ट्स हैं और वो 5th एस्पेक्ट का रेफरेंस है, द तंत्र पार्ट इन द इंटेग्रल योगा इज द होल फोकस ऑन द डिवाइन मदर. एंड व्हाट बेसिकली वो सिंथेसिस में एक सेंटेंस कहते हैं कि द इंटेग्रल योगा वी अराइव एट द एम ऑफ तंत्र थ्रू द मेथड ऑफ वेदांत. तंत्र का एम क्या है? डिवाइन परफेक्टिबिलिटी ऑफ मैटर. ये जो फ्रेज आया आगे जाकर के, तो इसमें वो सारी, दिस इज व्हाई इट इज कॉल्ड द इंटेग्रल योगा और द सिंथेटिक योगा, कि यहाँ पे बोथ द साइड्स, द पुरुषा एंड द प्रकृति साइड, उनको उन्होंने इस तरह से इंटेग्रेट किया. एंड मदर का जो सारा फोकस है इन द इंटेग्रल योगा ऑन द मदर, दैट इज द तांत्रिक एस्पेक्ट. आई मीन इट्स अ वेरी सिंपल थिंग, बट जस्ट बोल रहा हूँ इसको कंप्लीट करने के लिए. ओके. फॉर इट सीजन कंपेल्स, हाँ, कंपेल्स देम टू बिकम द मीन्स फॉर अ रिचर स्पिरिचुअल कॉन्क्वेस्ट and enables us to embrace the whole of life in our divine scope as the लीला of the divine. ठीक है. एक ही मुझे फ्रेज हाफ अ क्वार्टर याद है, हंसो लीलायते बहि. दिस कम्स इन वन ऑफ द उपनिषद्स. मैं सोचा लीला वर्ड आता कहाँ पे? आई फाउंड इट ओनली एट वन प्लेस. हंस बेसिकली मीन्स द सोल, लीलायते मीन्स इट प्लेस, बहि मीन्स आउटसाइड. जो श्री अरबिंदो ने एक उपनिषद लिखा है उसमें संस्कृत में, उसके अंदर लीला वर्ड आता है. सो दैट आइडिया इज देयर. Okay. And in some directions, it is more immediately rich and fruitful, for it brings forward into the foreground, along with divine knowledge, divine works, and enriched devotion of divine knowledge, the secrets also of the Hatha and Raja Yugas. Right? For example, जैसे दुर्गा सप्तशती के भी बिगनिंग में वो मुद्रास वगैरह करना, और वो अपना बॉडी को जो वो करते हैं ना, कॉन्सेक्रेट करते हैं बिफोर यू स्टार्ट डूइंग इट. दिस इज ऑल बेसिकली Hatha Yoga. All that is involving the Anna Kosha and the Prana Kosha, establishing the energy there. It's not using the body and the vital per se, but वो part उसमें include हो रहा है in that way. ठीक है. Hatha and Raja Yogas, the use of body and of mental ascesis for the opening up of the divine life on all its planes, to which the Gita gives only a passing and perfunctory attention. What he means this by here is, Hatha और Raja Yoga जो है उसके ऊपर गीता में बहुत ही कम वर्सेस है. हठ योगा के ऊपर तो मुश्किल से 2-3 होंगे. समम काय शिरोग्रीवम, जहां पे वो बॉडी को स्ट्रेट रखने की बात करते हैं, दैट इज द आसना वर्स, 6th चैप्टर में है. प्राणायाम के ऊपर 2 वर्सेस हैं. वन इज देयर इन द 6th चैप्टर, वन इज देयर इन द 4th चैप्टर. लाइक दैट बहुत ही कम है. प्राणापान समौ कृत्वा नासाभ्यंतरचारिणौ, लाइक दैट. और राजयोगा के ऊपर देर आर सिग्निफिकेंट, 6th चैप्टर में है. ऑल दैट एक जगह बैठना है, थॉट्स को बाहर फेंकना है, न किंचिदपि चिंतयेत, ऑल दैट इज बेसिकली द राजयोगा ऑफ द गीता. बट वो उतना जो मेन गीता जिन 3 चीजों पे करती है, द 3 मेन पावर्स ऑफ आवर बीइंग, वर्क्स, नॉलेज एंड लव, द ज्ञान योगा, कर्म योगा एंड भक्ति योगा. ऑलराइट. सो मोर ओवर इट ग्रास्प, अब ये जो उसमें ग्रास्प एट दैट आइडिया ऑफ द डिवाइन परफेक्टिबिलिटी ऑफ मैन possessed by the Vedic rishis but thrown into the background by the intermediate ages. ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है दिस फ्रेज, डिवाइन परफेक्ट. अब देखो वी आर इंडियन, डाउट होता है कि कहीं श्री अरबिंदो कोई ऐसी बात तो नहीं बोले जो पहले नहीं थी. भैया पहले भी थी. इट वाज देयर इन द वैदिक एजेस. ठीक है. It was thrown into the background by the intermediate ages. The idea of the divine, when they say immortality, they are wanting physical immortality when the Vedic rishis are saying it. Life Divine के फर्स्ट चैप्टर में जो शिव बंधु बोल रहे हैं ना, द फंडामेंटल ह्यूमन एस्पिरेशन, तो ह्यूमन एस्पिरेशन टाइटल है. लास्ट वर्ड क्या है उस पैराग्राफ का? इमॉर्टैलिटी. The earliest preoccupation of man and his awakened thoughts, पूरा वो जो लंबा वाला लास्ट वर्ड क्या है? इमॉर्टैलिटी. तो they were seeking even for that. And some of them, they say, they declare, we have become immortal. Amritaste bhavanti. They became immortal. ऐसे बोलते हैं. तो what exactly kind of immortality they have attained? I mean, physical form तो नहीं last करता है. I really don't know. जो अपने चिरंजीवी माने जाते हैं, वो मटीरियल बॉडी में है या वो एक सटल मटीरियल बॉडी में है, एग्जैक्टली आई कैनॉट से. बट उसमें भी फर्स्ट थिंग जो इमॉर्टैलिटी का जब प्रश्न आता है, तो इट शुड बी एब्सोल्युटली क्लियर कि फर्स्ट थिंग दैट वी हैव टू डू इज टू बिकम इमॉर्टल इन आवर कॉन्शियसनेस. वैदिक ऋषिज वर नॉट पुटिंग द कार्ट बिफोर द हॉर्स, जैसे कभी कभार ये गलती हो जाती है. फर्स्ट थिंग दैट यू हैव टू डू इज टू बिकम इमॉर्टल इन योर कॉन्शियसनेस. गीता बोलती है ब्रह्म भूत 5.24 में, ठीक है. और भी जगह ब्रह्म भूयाय कल्पते 18 चैप्टर में आता है. यू हैव टू बिकम द ब्रह्मन एंड द ब्रह्मन इज इमॉर्टल. यू हैव टू बिकम इमॉर्टल इन योर कॉन्शियसनेस. इमॉर्टैलिटी वैसे तो इट इज ग्रांटेड एनीवे. वी आर ऑल इमॉर्टल. देहिनोस्मिन यथा देहे, वो सारा को जो है ना, वो तो इट्स जस्ट द डेथ हैपेंस ओनली टू द बॉडी. इट डज नॉट हैपन टू द सोल. तो सोल तो इमॉर्टल है ही, बट यू हैव टू बिकम इमॉर्टल. जस्ट नोइंग दैट द सोल इज इमॉर्टल इज नॉट सफिशिएंट. वो तो है ही है. वो तो गीता पढ़ते ही पता चल जाता है 2.11 में, 2.12 में. There was never a time when I was not. There was never a time when you were not. There will never be a time when I will not be, when you will not be. You have to realize it. And physical जो बहुत बाद में आता है. Even mother was not able to do it in her body. Physically नहीं कर पाई. The resistance from matter was so much. Maybe if she wanted, she could have done it. She's the divine mother. But then फिर वो एक बहुत gap create हो जाता है between the two things. And whatever were her reasons for not accomplishing it, बट बेसिकली वो एक बहुत आगे की चीज है. बट द आइडिया ऑफ द डिवाइन परफेक्टिबिलिटी ऑफ मैन, जिसका अल्टीमेट इज द फिजिकल इमॉर्टैलिटी, दैट इज देयर इन द वैदिक टाइम्स. इट हैज बीन लॉस्ट इन द इंटरमीडिएट एजेस. ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है यहाँ पे. और यहाँ पे वो जो लास्ट में बोल रहे हैं, विच इज डेस्टिन्ड टू फिल सो लार्ज अ प्लेस इन एनी फ्यूचर सिंथेसिस ऑफ थॉट, सॉरी, ह्यूमन थॉट, एक्सपीरियंस एंड एस्पिरेशन. यही वो जो फ्यूचर सिंथेसिस है. This is the synthesis of yoga created by Sri Aurobindo. This is the fifth major synthesis in the history of Indian spirituality. Okay. वेदा, उपनिषद, गीता, तंत्र, और जो इन सारों को कंप्लीटली इंटीग्रेट और सिंथेसाइज कर दे, दैट इज द सिंथेटिक, दैट इज द इंटीग्रल योगा ऑफ श्री अरविंदो, जो उन्होंने सारा समझा. ऑब्वियसली ही विल नॉट से इट हियर कि मेरी दूसरी किताबें पढ़ लो, उसमें लिखा हुआ है मैंने. इट डजंट हैपन लाइक दिस. बट दिस इज व्हाट से डेस्टिन्ड टू फिल सो लार्ज अ प्लेस इन एनी फ्यूचर सिंथेसिस. कि ये जो आइडिया है डिवाइन परफेक्टिबिलिटी ऑफ मैन का, आप इसको अगर इग्नोर करोगे तो यू आर मिसिंग द होल पॉइंट. This is the most important thing. This divine perfectibility of man. And I mean, अलग अलग व्यक्ति का अलग अलग तरीके से शुरू होता है. If I am to be a little, not personal, तो since the age of 18-19 जो just driving force जो थी, it was just perfectibility. हर एक चीज को perfect करना है, perfect करना है, perfect करना है. There was no idea of ज्ञान योगा, कर्म योगा, भक्ति योगा, nothing. It is just the idea of perfectibility and perfection which got absolutely possessed. बहुतों के साथ होता है, I'm sure. We just want to be as perfect as possible in our work, in everything. that is the ultimate thing, that transformation of nature. Otherwise, जैसे मैंने पहले उसमें अवतारूढ़ वाले क्लासेस में बोला था कि to attain the divine consciousness in an untransformed nature. हालांकि if you do attain the divine consciousness, the nature is by default psychicized, spiritualized somewhat, but जो उसके अंदर crudities रह जाती हैं, जो उसके अंदर absurdities रह जाती हैं, as he said, it's like a crown on a pig's head, which is why the absolute necessity and this thing of the transformation of the nature itself. The perfectibility of the nature, गीता में उसको बोलते हैं परा प्रकृति, the higher nature. ठीक है.
Anmol,
हाँ, yes sir.
in this,
I am done.
in
मैं
this,
बहुत लंबा बोल दिया. I mean, वो just paragraph is so
No, no.
profound. हाँ, yes please Yogesh. Yes.
yeah, what I was saying is that the biggest challenge that all of us face is that the understanding of Brahman and that oneness is very well expounded by all paths, and the fact that there is that one stillness which is a witnessing consciousness to everything that's going on. But the moment you bring it into the works, if you see, be it the Buddhist philosophy and all the others that we talked about, how do you bring it into action, wherein you see that it is the universal oneness which is acting through us, is the biggest challenge. Being, all our philosophies that you are
आप अगर उस oneness के अंदर, आपने हार्ट के अंदर establish हो गए ना, you will become a saint, number one, in your heart. And naturally, with that change of consciousness within you, आपके actions में वो automatically reflect करेगा. You will
See,
start
this is my
becoming more
question,
हाँ.
Anmol. If you look at these Naga sadhus and whatever, there's a huge, it's not in lakhs and millions of Indian community, which is maybe observing that stillness, but the mindset of bringing it into action, we don't see.
उसका
So
रीजन
I
ये है ना
always have,
कि they are most of the people, if you see even today, most of the gurus, ठीक है, I have done courses of art of living, शीशी जे सदगुरु का ये वो, आप कहीं भी चले जाओ, फंडामेंटली दे टॉक अबाउट मुमुक्षुत्व ओनली. आप जाकर के देख लो. They don't have the idea of the transformation of the world, of making the earth into a heaven. वो मतलब they just वही जो शंकराचार्य का हेड ऑन टेक करने का और मायावाद को चैलेंज करके ये बोलने का कि द वर्ल्ड इज रियल, देयर इज अ पर्पस व्हाई द डिवाइन क्रिएटेड इट, इट इज ओनली टू पीपल हु हैव डन इट. इट इज विवेकानंदा हु फर्स्ट डिड इट एंड द जॉब हैज बीन कंप्लीटेड बाय श्री अरविंदो. किसी की हिम्मत ही नहीं होती है शंकराचार्य को चैलेंज करने की. I didn't want to use this kind of language and इस तरह के आवेश में, but this is the reality. Everybody is just happy to toe the line, एकदम हाथ जोड़ के खड़े हो जाते हैं शंकराचार्य के सामने.
एक चीज इस पे है.
Yes, please, Arpan.
ये वैसे मतलब ऐसा मतलब I won't say कि these are the only two proponents. मतलब
जो मैं जानता हूँ in my knowledge. आप बताइए please.
Even Vivekanand is not the right example.
वीडियो ऑन कर लो अपना, let people see you. हाँ.
पता नहीं मैं लग कैसे रहूंगा.
नहीं, doesn't matter. बोलो.
हाँ, तो Vivekanand is not the right ideal. Vivekanand himself was a Vedantin. He was a very powerful soul born in a certain era of great slavery. तो उन्होंने जो बोला सो बोला. But I think Abhinav Gupta is a much more powerful example. Shri Anirvan is
सेंचुरी में था.
हाँ, अभिनव गुप्त is I mean कितनी कलाएं, म्यूजिक, तंत्र और कश्मीर शैविज्म पूरा ही. कश्मीर शैविज्म is such a complete path if you read.
लेकिन उसका वो इतना पॉपुलर, मैं I'll be honest.
हाँ, मैं
आज से 2 साल पहले तक मैंने अभिनव गुप्ता का नाम तक नहीं सुना था. 2-3 साल पहले तक
मैं नहीं पॉपुलैरिटी पे नहीं जाते, क्योंकि पॉपुलर क्या होता है हमें भी पता है, क्या अनपॉपुलर होता है. श्री अरविंदो इज आल्सो नॉट वेरी पॉपुलर.
Exactly.
हाँ, तो if anyone thinks कि उनको completeness देखनी किसी पाथ में, तो they can explore Kashmir Shaivism, for example, even some parts of Buddhism. But back to Yogesh's question about how to implement
भाई,
this.
उसका जो रियल वो है ना, तो मैंने वो गीता का एक सर्वम कर्मा अखिलम पार्थ ज्ञाने परिसमाप्यते, ये जो आधा श्लोक है ना गीता का, दिस हैज लेड टू अ लॉट ऑफ डेवास्टेशन इन द सेंस कि कर्म करने का उद्देश्य केवल तब तक है जब तक ज्ञान की प्राप्ति हो जाए. एक बार ज्ञान प्राप्त हो गया तो फिर till you leave, the time comes to leave your body.
We don't need to go that far, क्योंकि गीता वगैरह में भी जो लिखा है, अगर even if we perfect that level, हमें ये वही बातें हैं जैसे जैसे राम और कृष्ण में कौन बड़े थे. अरे आप राम जैसे भी बन जाए तो राम is very sophisticated, nuanced in himself. People think that he is very naive.
ना कि वो स्टिलनेस तो प्राप्त हो गई, लेकिन वो वर्ल्ड के अंदर और वर्क्स के अंदर उतना रिफ्लेक्ट क्यों नहीं कर रही है. उसका रीजन ये है कि दे डोंट इवन हैव द आइडिया. वो आइडिया इतना ज्यादा कूट कूट के भर दिया गया है मायावाद का और जगत के मिथ्या विथ्या होने का, एंड द बेसिकली द क्या कहते हैं, द ट्रांजिटरीनेस ऑफ द वर्ल्ड and the uselessness of the world, ki people don't even think about bringing the divine into the world and bringing the divine into action. The sadhu kind of people, I mean to say. तो
उसमें भी मैं एक चीज ये कहना चाहता हूँ कि I mean ये जो नागा साधु, या मैं उनकी बात कर रहा हूँ, मैं उनकी बात नहीं कर रहा जो भी अटेंड ही नहीं अपने पाथ में, but even those who have attained, we are very far from questioning any of them. तो
yes, absolutely.
उसमें अगर आप एक बार वहाँ अटेन कर लेना, तो perfecting the world looks like a charity to them. It's very optional because you are very free of all these things. That's one thing. हमें कहीं ना कहीं ये भी सोचना चाहिए, जब हम वर्ल्ड के परफेक्टिबिलिटी की, ब्लिस की, फ्रीडम की बात करते हैं, तो कहीं ना कहीं हम अपने लाइफ के एक्सपीरियंसों से जोड़ के करते हैं. अरे लाइफ में इतनी परेशानी, they don't have any troubles in their life. That's the first thing. They're very free. तो उनके लिए चीजें सोचना ऑप्शनल है. And a lot of
at what price have they earned that freedom?
Price was paid by a different consciousness, as Sri Aurobindo told Dilip Kumar Roy, when he did not believe that he has all these powers in his soul, that you are judging the possibilities of another self by the possibilities of this self. So they have moved into another self. तो उनके लिए सब चीजें ऑप्शनल बची हैं. They don't really connect with all this. और जो भी हम सोचते करते हैं, that's very deeply tied to our life experience, our desire, our pains, which they don't have. So we have to keep that in mind. And back to Yogesh's question as to how to experience that in life, तो एक तो पॉजिटिव तरीका है कि भाई आप मतलब you actually believe कि मतलब जो थोड़े एक्टिविस्ट टाइप के लोग भी होते हैं, उनमें भी कहीं ना कहीं इसकी स्फुरणा होती है वननेस की, कि मैं जो कर रहा हूँ वो भगवान को अर्पण करके कर रहा हूँ या समाज के लिए कर रहा हूँ, जैसा भी आपकी श्रद्धा है. लेकिन एक एस्पेक्ट इसमें ये भी है जो इजी बना सकता है, नकारात्मक एस्पेक्ट भी है। आप आज रात को बैठे हैं सोने से पहले और जस्ट आस्क योरसेल्फ व्हाई आर यू नॉट फीलिंग हैप्पी और व्हाई आर यू नॉट फीलिंग ब्लिसफुल राइट नाउ, और तुरंत जो मेजर मूवमेंट्स आपकी कॉन्शियसनेस के जो आवृत कर रहे हैं उसको, वो एकदम सामने आ जाएंगे आपके, एंड देन यू कैन just detach yourself from them and you'll feel some ease. So that's a very tiny micro step of the first step, I would say. That's
Right.
something you can delve into.
Yeah,
Vivek bhai,
Anmol,
you can
the
also
point
on
I
your
was
camera,
trying to make.
and we're about to come to the end of the session. 9:95 we should end. किसी
Sorry,
और का कोई
hogging
क्वेश्चन
this.
था? मनोज जी, और कौन है? श्वेता, स्वाति, रितु जी, अरोड़ा जी, एनीथिंग? समीर जी, एनीथिंग? अदरवाइज वी आर कमिंग टू द क्लोज ऑफ द 1 hour जो हमने डेजिग्नेट किया है इसके लिए। हाँ, नहीं तो अदरवाइज वी कैन आइदर डिस्कस फॉर अ फ्यू मिनट्स एंड देन क्लोज, या जैसे भी।
Yeah,
I mean,
Anmol,
I am this thing now.
Anmol,
Yes.
just my one point
Yes.
is that in the evolution of the consciousness to come to that point of stillness, the point I was highlighting is that it does not evolve. The fact that there are
पहली बात जो
millions
समझने
of
वाली है वो
people-
ये है कि जो वो स्टिलनेस है, ठीक है, दैट इज जस्ट द बेस ऑफ द क्रिएशन, इट इज नॉट द अल्टीमेट ओरिजिन। जो ओरिजिन है दैट इज स्टिलनेस एंड डायनामिज्म एट वंस। द स्टिलनेस इज ओनली द अक्षर पुरुषा, ब्राह्मी स्थिति, ठीक है, इट इज नॉट द सुप्रीम। फर्स्ट थिंग इज टू अंडरस्टैंड इज दिस, जो जिसके अंदर स्टिलनेस और डायनामिज्म दोनों एट वंस साइमल्टेनियसली है, दैट इज द पुरुषोत्तम। पहली बात, ठीक है। तो द एम ऑफ द स्पिरिचुअल एवोल्यूशन इज नॉट टू रीच द स्टिलनेस। वो स्टिलनेस रीच करना, ठीक है, फर्स्ट एम है, वो गीता का फर्स्ट एम है कि आपने अक्षर पुरुष को प्राप्त कर लिया, ब्राह्मी स्थिति को प्राप्त कर लिया, फाइन, बट देन यू हैव टू गो फर्दर। वो आपको ज्ञान योग भी वहां पहुंचा देगा, लेकिन जब तक भक्ति योग नहीं आएगा एंड दैट रिलेशन इज डेवलप्ड विद द पुरुषोत्तमा, तब तक वो जो सुप्रीम रियलिटी है उसका अनुभव आपको नहीं होगा। तो टू थिंक दैट स्टिलनेस इज द एम, इट्स अ फर्स्ट एम, बट इट इज नॉट द अल्टीमेट गोल, ठीक है। In the integral divine, stillness and dynamism are like complementary, और वो opposite, मतलब सिक्के हैं वो दोनों, एक उसके वो फेसेस हैं दोनों कॉइन के, बट द होल कॉइन इटसेल्फ दैट इज ओनली द पुरुषोत्तम। यही तो मतलब इंडियन स्पिरिचुअलिटी के जो लास्ट 2000 साल के करीब रहे हैं ना, 2,500 साल, बुद्धिज्म और शंकराचार्य का प्रिलूड, और अभी भी जैसे अगर आप ज्यादातर अभी भी अगर आप देखो, इट्स नॉट अ ओवर स्टेटमेंट, स्पिरिचुअलिटी का मतलब लोग समझते हैं ध्यान में बैठ जाना, मेडिटेट करना, एकदम स्टिल हो जाना, दैट इज जस्ट द फर्स्ट थिंग। व्हाट आर यू गोइंग टू डू विद दैट स्टिलनेस? ठीक है, once you have reached the stillness, you may not do anything with it, fine, but then what was the purpose of the world in the first place if stillness was the aim? This is the thing which Sri Aurobindo clarifies very beautifully in his writings. तो sorry, मतलब just I hope कि address हुआ होगा जो आप कह रहे थे।
Yes, thanks.
Okay. Anything else, or should we close with a silence of 1 minute? 9:05 हो गया, because लोगों ने सबने एक ही घंटा डिजिग्नेट किया होगा। और those who want to drop off can drop off. If you want to have a discussion further, we can have, myself, Yogesh ji, Arpan, जैसे चाहें, ठीक है। I'll close the recording now. मैं बंद कर रहा हूँ।
मेरे पास तो एक हफ्ते समय है।
Okay, I'm stopping the